The glass of the control tower trembled as desert wind slammed against it. The sharp tang of jet fuel burned the back of my throat. My headset dug into my temples, every heartbeat pounding against the ear cups. Eagle 7, do you read Thunderbolt? My voice cut through static that buzzed like a hive of angry bees trapped inside the comms rack. On the radar screen, one single blip jerked across the scope, its path crooked, desperate. His fuel gauge was bleeding red. The flaps system had gone dead. Behind me, Colonel Morrison's shadow stretched long across the vinyl floor, cold as a blade at my spine. No one had authorized me to sit in this chair. No one had told me I could rip open the comm cabinet and jam a blackened cable back into its socket. But at 18,000 feet, authorization means nothing. The only law left is survival. This is Staff Sergeant Sofia Rivera. Listen carefully, Eagle 7. Flip the auxiliary flap release, 2 stages. Hold for 3 seconds. Bleed speed step by step. When you hit the threshold, drop the tailhook. You'll catch the cable. My hands were still slick with engine grease, sweat stinging into the cuts along my knuckles. Out there, one life hung by a thread of steel. In here, so did my own career. If either line snapped, everything would crash. My name is Sofia Rivera, Staff Sergeant, United States Air Force. On paper, I am a mechanic, a lead technician, responsible for the survival of the F-16 Fighting Falcons parked along the Nevada tarmac. In reality, I was the grease-stained ghost no one wanted to acknowledge. At 5'2", I often disappeared in the shadow of an airframe. Oil streaks decorated my arms like war paint, and the smell of jet fuel clung to my hair long after nightfall. The others, men with mirrored sunglasses and pilot wings stitched proudly to their flight suits, called me a hangar rat. They laughed when I walked past, the sound echoing off corrugated steel walls like grovel thrown at glass. To them, I belonged on the ground, wrenches in hand, invisible. I worked while they boasted about call signs, drinks at the officers' club, and maneuvers over the desert sky. My victories were quieter. A stubborn actuator humming smooth after hours of torque, a turbine spinning without vibration, a jet roaring back to life under my fingertips. Those machines respected precision. The men around me did not. I kept my logbook hidden in my toolbox. A civilian flight record I had built 1 underpaid hour at a time, paying for lessons at a rundown airfield outside Reno. Each page was heavy with inked entries, proof of every takeoff, every landing, every drop of sweat that said I was more than a mechanic. But Thunderbolt Air Base had its own unspoken rules. Mechanics fixed, pilots flew. And anyone who blurred that line became a threat to the hierarchy. The smirk on Captain Rodriguez's face told me as much whenever he passed by, soda can tapping casually against his thigh.
Colonel Morrison? His silence cut sharper than any insult, his stare telling me exactly what he thought. You don't belong here. I told myself their judgment didn't matter. What mattered was the aircraft, the checklists, the work. But deep down, I knew the day would come when my silence would no longer be enough. That day arrived sooner than anyone expected. The first time I realized the rules of Thunderbolt weren't written in ink, but in contempt, it was blistering noon on the flight line. The Nevada sun hammered the concrete until the air shimmered like mirage. I was half buried beneath Falcon 415, tightening the actuator bolts when the circle of pilots formed in the hangar's shade. "Listen, grease monkey," Rodriguez's voice carried, smug and lazy. "If you ever touch a real stick, I'll personally call the medics." The laughter that followed was brutal, bouncing off the metal siding until it pressed into my ears like static. I kept turning the wrench. The bite of steel into my palm was steadier than their words, but inside, heat coiled. My jaw locked for 1 heartbeat. Then I went back to work. That was the game. Pretend you didn't hear, because answering only made the circle laugh harder. Still, every word clung like jet fuel fumes, impossible to wash away. Then came Morrison. He approached with the measured crunch of polished Oxfords on gravel, every step slicing through the chatter. I slid from beneath the fuselage, snapping to attention. Sweat traced down my temple, the desert air sharp against the salt. "And you are?" His tone was flat, like reciting an inventory list. "Staff Sergeant Rivera, sir. Lead technician on this airframe, running post-flight checks." His gaze cut past me to the toolbox. He plucked a black leather-bound book from its corner. My breath stalled. "A diary." "My civilian flight logbook, sir." He flipped pages with deliberate slowness, eye scanning the hours I had paid for with overtime shifts, dawn flights, lessons squeezed into weekends. Every mark of ink was a brick in the path I had been building, fragile but real. "Mechanics have no business pretending to be pilots." He snapped the book shut, tucking it under his arm like captured contraband. "Now get back to your work." He walked away with my dream clamped under his elbow. That was the moment it stopped being just jokes or nicknames. It became sabotage. The next morning, the 916 wrench was gone. Hours later, I found it behind a hydraulic cart across the hangar. Maintenance reports I'd filed vanished in transit, as though swallowed by the desert wind. A week later, grit floated in my water bottle, crunching against my teeth before I spat it into the dust. The message was clear. You don't belong here. I ate alone in the cafeteria, the plastic fork squeaking against trays while laughter rolled from the pilot's table. I walked the perimeter fence at night, floodlights throwing the falcons into harsh relief, their silver bodies gleaming while mine felt like a shadow no one wanted. Sometimes I traced the fence line with my fingertips, the rough metal digging into skin already scarred from tools. The machines, at least, rewarded persistence. But humans? Humans saw my ambition as a crime. It wasn't just Morrison's confiscation of the logbook or Rodriguez's laughter. It was the collective verdict of every sideways glance, every missing tool, every report gone accidentally missing. Together, they built a wall daring me to climb or break. I thought I could endure it in silence, that maybe skill alone would earn its respect. But silence only made me a cautionary tale. And then, one hot morning, silence nearly killed a man. The day started like every other. Blinding sun, the smell of scorched metal and jet fuel rising from the tarmac. But the rhythm of the flight line faltered when I heard it, the too fast snap of a checklist page turning. A young pilot was pacing around Falcon 415, running pre-flight. His hands moved quick, careless. My eyes narrowed as he reached the wing root. The actuator I'd worked on the night before sat half exposed. He prodded it with one hand, heavier than procedure allowed. The faint clack echoed across the concrete, a sound only mechanics notice, the whisper of metal fatigued beyond tolerance. My stomach dropped. I dropped the rag from my hands and strode forward. I heard the actuator pop under load. That's not normal. With respect, you're not cleared to re-inspect my bird. Launch windows tight. Then a colder shadow fell over us. Colonel Morrison. His presence sucked the air out of the space. "What's going on?" His tone wasn't curious. It was a loaded gun. "Nothing, sir," the pilot answered quickly. "Just about to taxi." I tried again. "Sir, I believe there's a defect in the flap actuator. I need clearance." "Enough." Morrison cut me off, his hand slicing the air like a blade. The words snapped shut like a steel door. I could feel the pilot's relief, the colonel's authority pressing against heat. I swallowed it down, retreating to the shadows of Hangar 6. From there, I watched Falcon 415 taxi out, canopy flashing sunlight like a mirror. The roar of its afterburners shook dust loose from the rafters above my head.
My hands clenched around the edge of the doorframe until my nails bit skin. The message was final. Stay in your place, Rivera. By the second week of this campaign against me, I was no longer just mocked. I was isolated. New airmen glanced at me like a warning sign, whispering that crossing invisible lines would end in exile. Still, the sound of that actuator clack gnawed at me. It followed me into the empty barracks at night, echoed in the silence when I walked the perimeter fence. I told myself it was just another insult I had to swallow. But machines don't lie, and this one had already spoken. When 415 lifted off that afternoon, a thin shimmer in the desert sky, my body stayed in Hangar 6, but my mind followed the aircraft. Every rivet I had tightened, every warning I had raised, every word Morrison had silenced, they all climbed with Martinez into the air. And then it happened. The tower called. Static hissed. Broken fragments bled through. Flap. Control. Negative response. Primary comms. Down. My chest turned to ice. The very fault I'd flagged had bloomed mid-flight. That was the moment the plan was no longer a dream of someday. It was immediate, raw necessity. Not to humiliate them, though God knew they deserved it, but to prove in front of every witness at Thunderbolt that I was not wrong. Machines had always been my allies. I knew their heartbeat better than the men in pressed flight suits ever would, so I leaned on that knowledge like a blade sharpened over years. First step, access. I carried a master key ring, every mechanic did. The trick wasn't possession, it was audacity. Would I dare climb into the control tower, slip through the maintenance corridor while officers barked orders upstairs? Yes. If a man's life hung in the balance, hesitation was betrayal. Second step, diagnosis. In the comms room, the air buzzed with failing electronics, the metallic tang of overheated copper scratching the back of my throat. I saw it instantly. A black lead cable, scorched where it had arced against the frame. Power surging unstable, the backup array flickering out like a dying heartbeat. Morrison would have called it useless. I knew better. Third step, repair. I yanked open my kit. Grease still slicked the handle from earlier, my hands trembling only until the first tool touched metal. Then instinct took over. Strip shielding, cut the burn segment, reroute copper through clean contact. 30 seconds, I told the tech beside me. 30 seconds of silence that would drop the last link to Eagle 7. It's already dead, he muttered. Not if I bring it back, I snapped. The moment the module rebooted, the hiss of dead air shifted, becoming a voice gasping through smoke. Tower, this is Eagle 7, fuel critical, approach unstable. I didn't wait for permission. I packed my kit, stormed upstairs, and shoved past Martinez's glare into the glass cabin. My pulse hammered, but my voice came calm. Eagle 7, this is Thunderbolt Tower. I have you on partial. Do you copy? Tower, read you, barely. Controls compromised, fuel low. This is Staff Sergeant Rivera. I worked on your bird. You've got a flap actuator failure. Primary hydraulics are gone. I'll walk you through manual override. In that instant, the plan clicked into its final step. Exposure. Every officer in that room, every pilot lounging outside, every tech who'd ever whispered, she doesn't belong. They would hear me take control of a jet from the ground. They would watch me pull Martinez down alive, thread by thread until denial itself collapsed. This wasn't vengeance with fists, it was vengeance through competence, razor clean. My voice would be the scalpel cutting through their arrogance. And when the jet's hook finally caught the arrestor cable with a whip crack, when Martinez's aircraft shuddered to a stop instead of erupting into fire, no one could ever again call me hangar rat. I had turned their sabotage into my proof. And now the real fight was about to begin. The tower's glass panes rattled as Eagle 7 staggered into view over the desert horizon, a dark speck jerking against the molten sky. My headset crackled with bursts of static and Martinez's strained breathing. Fuel, Critical, he rasped. No response on primary flaps. Losing trim. I gripped the console so hard the plastic edges cut into my palm. Every eye in the cabin was on me now. Morrison's face had gone pale stone, but he didn't stop me. He couldn't. Not when Martinez's life hung by threads only I knew how to weave. Eagle 7, listen carefully, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my wrist. Auxiliary flap release, red lever on your right, 2-stage. Push forward, hold 3 seconds. Copy. His words trailed into a grunt. The blip on the radar dipped, wavered, then steadied. A collective exhale filled the cabin, but I didn't breathe. Now, bleed speed, 10 knots at a time, smooth. You're too heavy for a standard runway. We're diverting to secondary. You'll need the arrestor cable. The secondary strip stretched across the desert like a scar, barely visible through the tower glass. A brutal crosswind gusted sand across its surface, the storm taste of grit already seeping into the room's vents. Tailhook armed, he gasped. At that moment, a warning light flared across the tower's console. Wind shear alert. My stomach lurched. Eagle 7, abort primary. Adjust heading 2 degrees north. Trust me. Static. Then his reply. Copy. Adjusting. The room went silent, except for the rising roar of the jet. From the window, I caught the flash of its canopy, the howl of the engine punching through the desert air. The Falcon dropped low, too fast, the news straining high. Level it! Throttle back! Now! My shout cracked sharp as a whip. The sound came next, the brutal snap of steel under tension. The hook slammed into the arrestor cable with a whip crack that echoed like gunfire across the base. Sparks sprayed as the line stretched. The jet shuddered violently, and then, against all odds, halted. For one endless heartbeat, no one moved. Then the tower erupted. Cheers, applause, hands clapping shoulders. But I didn't celebrate. I slid the headset off, set it quietly on the console, and walked toward the stairwell without a word. Behind me, Morrison called out, half fury, half awe, but I didn't stop. The sweat on my back had already cooled to a chill, my fingers still buzzing with the vibration of metal and adrenaline. Downstairs, the hangar doors stood open. Pilots who once laughed at me stood frozen, their sunglasses failing to mask the shock in their eyes. I passed them without acknowledgement, the echo of their earlier insults trailing me like ghosts. Because today, silence was my weapon. They had tried to erase me. Instead, they had handed me the perfect stage. But saving Martinez was only the beginning. The reckoning, for Morrison, for Rodriguez, for every man who bet against me, was still to come. That evening, the debriefing hall brimmed with bodies. Pilots in pressed flight suits, mechanics still streaked with oil, officers in their stiff collars. The air smelled of starch, sweat, and jet fuel carried in from the tarmac. Every chair faced the podium, but the weight of 100 eyes pressed against my back as I walked in. At the front stood Captain Martinez, pale but alive. His voice cracked once as he began, then strengthened. Eagle 7 went up routine. Midway, I lost flap control. Comms failed. Fuel bled out. I was out of options. Then, he paused, gaze sweeping the room, landing squarely on me. Staff Sergeant Sofia Rivera came on frequency. She knew my aircraft systems better than I did. She walked me through an override I'd never touched. I'm standing here alive because of her. A ripple went through the room, the kind that silences even the most arrogant. Chairs creaked as heads turned toward me. The very people who had called me hangar rat now stared as though seeing me for the first time. Then came the twist that split the air like thunder. Martinez lifted a sheet of paper. I have formally recommended Sergeant Rivera for the Air Force Commendation Medal and immediate entry into officer training. For a beat, silence reigned. Even the ventilation hum seemed to pause. Rodriguez's smirk had evaporated, leaving only a tight jaw and darting eyes. Morrison's face hardened, but beneath the stone a crack showed. His verdict of "you don't belong here" had just been overturned in front of everyone. I felt none of the triumph I had once imagined, only a cold clarity. They had gambled my silence against a man's life, and they had lost. Later that night, Morrison appeared at my quarters. He held something in his hand, the black logbook he had stolen weeks before. He didn't meet my eyes at first. "Staff Sergeant," he said slowly, voice rougher than I'd ever heard. "I was wrong. My judgment was flawed. You'll report to the training office at 0800. The logbook pressed into my palm carried more weight than any medal. The hours inked inside had been dismissed as childish fantasy. Now they were my passport. Behind him, the hallway buzzed with whispers. Word had already spread. The mechanic had guided a jet to the ground. The one they laughed at would soon wear officer bars. I closed the door after him, logbook tight in my hand. The silence that followed was not loneliness. It was vindication. By morning, I would stand in a fresh flight suit, not as their joke, but as their equal, and soon, their lead. The training field was brutal. Scorched asphalt strips stretching into heat haze, prefab classrooms rattling in the wind, and a skeletal control tower that looked more like a relic than a guardian. Yet when I zipped into my fresh flight suit for the first time, logbook clipped to my board, the fabric felt like armor. Drills came fast. Takeoff and landings in the T-38, engine-out emergencies, formation flights with 3 other jets carving arcs across the desert sky. Every test was a gauntlet meant to break hesitation. But hesitation had been burned out of me long ago. When the instructor killed my engine mid-turn, I throttled back, trimmed, and settled the frame onto the stip with 100 feet to spare. When a lead ship took a simulated hit during a live fire run, I slid into position without waiting for orders, locked the target, and fired clean. Each choice stacked like bricks, not flashy, but solid. Proof written in discipline. Proof no one could erase. Weeks later, the final evaluation ended with a small ceremony on the flight line. Morrison slid a small box across the table. Inside, the silver bars of a lieutenant. His nod was tight, but this time respectful. Beside him, Martinez pinned the insignia onto my collar. "Lieutenant, you've got lead in the next joint exercise. Don't make me regret it." I allowed myself the smallest smile in return. "Wouldn't dream of it, Captain." That night, I walked to the far end of the runway. Sodium lights faded into desert darkness, and above me the stars hung low and clear. In the distance, another sortie thundered skyward, engines roaring like a promise. I remembered the insults, the missing tools, the bitter taste of grit in my water bottle. All the small cuts meant to push me out. Instead, they had honed me into steel. My new bars caught the glow of the lights, not shining for decoration, but gleaming with weight earned in silence. You don't need to shout to be heard. You only need to keep moving forward. One check, one climb, one landing at a time.